Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Podcast.co AMA for the month. So you might notice something a little bit different this month. I am without my usual co-host, Daryl. He's off having a lovely time, I'm sure, probably looking after that new cat that he's got. So you've got just me for today, but same type of deal. I'm going to take you through a quick walkthrough of the Podcast.co platform, show you how it all works and how you can get set up really easily and really quickly. And then we're going to go into a little Q&A session at the end. So if you do have any questions as I'm going through stuff, do feel free to leave them in the comments, and then those will be fed back to me and I'll be able to get to them at the end. So without further ado, I suppose we'll be getting into the demo of the platform. So here we go. Exactly on cue. The magic man behind the scenes is wonderful. So this is a little example account that I've got set up right here. And what I'll do for you guys is just take you on a quick whiz-stop tour of everything so you know where everything is. And if you want to start a podcast with us, you've already got that knowledge of how to find everything. So first things first, if you do sign up with us and log in for the very first time, the very first screen you'll see is this one here. And this is just basically creating your new podcast. So if you are bringing a podcast over from another hosting platform, so say if you're on a different hosting platform, you've already got a podcast, but you quite like to bring it over to us and manage it with us instead, completely fine. That's completely doable. You click Import Podcast Settings here. Pop your existing RSS feed in the box, and then a little preview will pop up with the artwork, the title, description, and how many episodes the system has registered are on the RSS feed. So just double check everything's okay there, because some hosting platforms do put limits on the amount of episodes that appear in your RSS feed. So it's just worth double checking that that's all okay. And then click Import Podcasts, and that will bring everything into Podcast.co. And the very last step of that process is just going back to your old hosting platform and putting what we call a 301 redirect in place on your old RSS feed with them. We do have a bunch of guides on how to do that for each of the directories in our help center, which is just help.podcast.co. There's a guide for pretty much all of the main ones in there. But if you're not sure, you can just fire us a message and I'll see what I can find for you, and we'll help you get over and sorted, no problem. If you're creating a brand new podcast with us, you would click the other option here, which just says create a new podcast, and then fill in all the details about your podcast. So the name, what categories you want to be in, the language, bit of a description. On the next step over, you'll also choose some artwork for your podcast if you already have it. If you don't, you can skip that step for now. But just be aware that you will have to have something in place before we can send your podcast out to places like Apple and Spotify and all those lovely places so people can listen to it. And then you'll be all set up and ready to go. So if I just go back and I will take you through what a normal podcast looks like on the platform. So as you can see here, this is just a little home page, and this basically just gives you some very quick figures for kind of if you need to like log in, grab some quick stats and then log back out again. So from here, you can see everything at a very quick glance. You've got how many episodes are live on your podcast currently, your monthly downloads and monthly unique downloads. Now, the difference between these essentially is monthly download shows every single download your podcast has had for the month, and monthly unique downloads is every person that's downloaded. So the example I usually give is just if I was to download an episode of your podcast 4 times in a row, total, so this one, orange one, would show 4, but unique would show 1 because I'm one person downloading 1 episode. So that's kind of the difference between the two. Both of those are based on a 30-day rolling period as well. So don't panic if you see the numbers go up and down. You haven't lost downloads. It's just the 30-day period rolling along. And then you've got this one on the right that shows you what your estimated subscriber amount is likely at. So the way that works is it just picks up the amount of unique downloads that happened for the last 3 episodes during their first 24 hours live, and then works out an average based on that. So it's kind of based on the assumption that if somebody is subscribed to the podcast, whatever app they're using will automatically download the new episodes as they come in pretty much straight away. So they're ready to listen to later on. So it works out based on that. When you first get started, you'll have a little checklist under this section as well of 3 things to get your podcast started and off the ground. Each of those has a little video explanation by me. And then once you've got those ticked off, they'll disappear like they have here. And you'll have links down the bottom here to our free crash course on podcasting. That's really great if you're just getting started with podcasting and you want to learn some more about how to podcast. You've got the production services. So we also offer production services like recording, editing, and a bunch more. So if you're interested in hiring us out to do that sort of thing, it's worth a chat. And also you have another one on the end here is a link to our help center that I mentioned earlier with all those lovely help guides in for pretty much everything we have on the platform. So if you get stuck, you can usually find your answers in there. I should mention on a normal account as well, you do usually have a little chat icon in the bottom right, and that just gets through to the support desk. So if you've got any burning questions, you can ask through there. That is not a 24-hour chat, so it's live between 9 and 5:30, Monday to Friday. That's in UK time. So if you message during those hours, you'll get a reply pretty quickly. If you message outside of those hours, it will be the next working morning. Episodes tab here is basically where you just manage all of the episodes of your podcast. So uploading and naming and arranging all of that, scheduling episodes. So, really easy process. To upload an episode, you can either click and drag an MP3 into this window and it'll start uploading, or you can click the orange upload episode button up here. That will then open up your file finder and you can grab the file that way instead. So whichever you prefer, they both do the same thing. Once the episode is in, this window will pop up automatically and you can type in the title of the episode, a bit of a description about what's going on in the episode. Author, you don't really need to fill in unless it's not your usual host. So if you've got a guest host in for an episode, you would fill that in. But otherwise, you can just leave that blank because it will automatically fill in using the main author for the podcast. And I'll show you where you can put that in a little bit. Episode type. So if you've got a trailer, you can label it as a trailer, and then directories like Spotify, for example, they are now separating out trailers to the side for easy listening purposes. So if you wanted to have that kind of setup, you can label them appropriately. We also have a bonus tag in here as well for if you've got any bonus episodes you want to label as bonus content, you can do that. So people usually use that for if they've done an interview and they've had to maybe cut out some bits and bobs just to make it an easily digestible episode. They'll mesh those into a separate bonus episode and then upload that as well. Episode number, season number. If you're doing seasons, if you're not, you can leave that blank. You have a little content rating filter right here. So if you've got some naughty words in there, you can just turn that on and that will mark it explicit in directories. If you do think every single episode is going to have swearing or inappropriate content in there, there is a switch for the entire podcast that I'll show you in a little bit. And that just, if you turn that on, it applies it to the whole podcast and it just saves you having to turn this one on for every single episode you upload. And also we have a pre and post roll feature. So I'll go into more detail on that in a little bit. But that's just how you turn that on and off for this one episode. And then once you've filled in the details of the episode, the very last window that will pop up is this one. And this is just deciding when you want the episode to go live. So public is live straight away. Scheduled is if you want to schedule an episode up to automatically publish at a later date and time. So we've got a couple of presets here. Or you can select a custom upload date and time at the end here instead. It's really easy. And then unlisted is basically like a drafts box. So anything in there isn't publicly accessible. It's only accessible if you've got the direct link to the episode that's in there. So that's pretty good for maybe if you've done an interview with someone who needs to approve the content before it goes out. You could upload it to that section. And then give the person the link and they'll be able to check it out, make sure it's all okay. And then once you've got the okay, you can move it across into published or into scheduled, depending on what you need. And you can see all of these sections up here as well, so you can check what's in each section. Maybe you want to look at the scheduled section and see what's coming up, just to make sure you've scheduled everything out okay. You can do that too. And then just on the end here, you've got a couple of extra buttons. So share episode opens up this window and gives you a few ways of sharing the episode out. So we've got two different styles of player for individual episodes. So maybe if you have like a blog style website and you wanted to embed an episode of the podcast at the top of an article, you'd probably use one of these. So we have a slightly chunkier one, or we have the slim mini player down the bottom here. You can change the color scheme of these, so you're not stuck with the black and purple you can see here. I'll show you that in a little bit. And if you're on the business plan, which is the highest plan, you can also get rid of these little Podcast.co P logos in the corner there and at the end there. Page is just the link to this episode on the podcast page that we provide you with. Again, I'll be showing that in more detail in a little bit, but just know that that is a direct link to this episode. So if you wanted one for maybe sharing out on Twitter or other social media platforms, that's a pretty good one to use. File you may or may not need. So this is mainly for people that are using third-party podcast players that need the direct MP3 links to work. Rather than having to scroll all the way through your RSS feed code, we've just popped it right here so you can grab that really easily instead. And finally, we've got the audiogram feature on this section as well. So this is a collaboration we have with Headliner. It's a really, really handy little tool. I highly recommend checking it out and just having a fiddle around with it when you've got a spare few minutes. But essentially, this allows you to create some really nice looking like audio videos. That sounded really weird. Some little video clips basically of your podcast audio content. So it'll put your logo in the background. You can get a nice animated waveform on there. If the clip is under 10 minutes, I think you can have captions on there as well, which is particularly good for platforms like Facebook where things start auto playing without audio at first. So it's a really, really powerful little tool, definitely worth having a check out and a little play around with. You also have an episode analytics button on the end here. Now, mine are going to be absolutely awful because this podcast isn't public, so yours will all look a lot better than this, I'm sure. But really easy to manage. You can change the date range you're looking at by clicking one of the presets here, or by clicking a custom start and end date on the calendar, and that will all adjust in the background for you, like that. You've got a graph up top showing your total and unique downloads per day. You can hover over each of those to get an actual number for each. And you have two down the bottom showing the locations of your listeners and also what platforms they're using to listen to your podcast. So things like Apple Podcasts, the embedded players, Stitcher, all of those will be down there. And then on the end here, on these three dots, is kind of like a little rescue list. So if anything goes wrong with an episode, generally you can fix it in here. So edit just brings up this window again. So maybe if you've made a typo or something like that in the description, you can open this and then correct it really easily if you need to in here. Replace media is exactly what it sounds like. If you accidentally upload a draft version of your episode, it's definitely happened to me before. You can click replace media and select the right file, and then upload that over the top without having to take the episode down and re-upload it again, which can be a pain. Move to unlisted is exactly what it sounds like. It moves the episode into the unlisted section. And the transcription feature also lives in here. So if I can find one that isn't done, I don't think this end one's done. There we go. So when you open this, you basically select the language of the main speaker from the little drop down there, click continue, and then that will start generating the transcript for that episode. Generally, for an average sort of 20 to 40 minute episode, you're looking at about 20 to 30 minutes of processing time. So go grab a coffee or something and then come back. And basically, you just open it up again. So those three dots and then transcription again. If it's done, it will bring up the full finished transcript of the episode. So you can copy that into a Google Doc and make any corrections you need to, and then use that wherever you need. Or it will come up with a little window just saying we're still working on it, you know. Come back in a little bit. So that's pretty handy for if you wanted to start providing transcripts in an easy way for your listeners. Really helps with searchability in Google and other search engines. And it can also provide an additional resource for any of your listeners that might be hard of hearing. So it's good for accessibility as well. So it's a good thing to look into doing. Moving along here, we have the analytics tab. So this I'll kind of whiz through because it is kind of the same as what I just showed you with the episode analytics, but this time it's for the whole podcast. So again, you can choose the date range that you're looking at using the selector up here, and everything adjusts in the background. You've got this graph up top showing total and unique downloads per day. The same two down the bottom showing where in the world your listeners are and what platform they're using to listen. But you do also get one over here on the left that shows you what your top 10 most popular episodes have been. Now, because this podcast only has a few episodes uploaded, it's only showing 4. But under normal circumstances, that would show you your top 10, just to give you an idea of what kinds of stuff your listeners have been into. So you might revisit those topics later on, or if you do interviews, you might bring that person back for another follow-up episode later on. In settings here, so this is all just the main settings for the podcast, pretty straightforward. So if you ever needed to do anything like upload new artwork or change about the description a little bit, you can do all of that in this section. We do also have a little toggle down here to turn on a weekly digest email with your latest podcast analytics for the week. So that's pretty handy if you just want a nice, easy, automatically delivered way of getting some stat numbers sent to your email. It's really, really decent. In advanced here, this is one of the most important sections, and I try to emphasize that on all of these live streams that we do, because people miss this section sometimes, and it can cause a few issues if it's not set up correctly. So most of the bits in here are pretty straightforward, but the ones to really highlight are time zone. So if that doesn't match your time zone, the scheduling feature will be completely out for you. So it's worth just double checking that that is set up to match your own time zone, just to make sure that those episodes are going out when they're supposed to. Author name here is super important. If that's not filled in, it will either pull in the account owner's name, which isn't great if you're trying to do a podcast for a business, for example, and the author needs to be the business name, or it will leave it blank in the RSS feed, which can then cause problems when submitting to certain directories. So it's worth just making sure that that is filled in exactly how you want it to appear. And then just making sure these little content settings down here match up with the content that you're putting out. So whether your podcast is episode by episode or in seasons, what language the podcast is in, and whether it is clean or explicit in nature. So that's what I was talking about before. If you think most episodes of your podcast are going to be explicit in nature, just turn it on there, and then that will apply it automatically to every episode you put out. Just saves you having to turn that toggle on every single time. If you're on the business plan, there is a little toggle right here to turn our Podcast.co logos off on the embeddable players I just showed you, and also the podcast page that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. And right down the bottom here, you've got the media URL prefix box, and that is basically for connecting up any third-party analytics services, so things like Chartable and Podtrack. They usually give you a little link, so you just copy and paste that into this box and click Save Changes, and that will apply that for you. So really easy to set up. The advertising tab here is only available on our Pro plan and above. So this is a way of adding in potential sponsorship messages to your podcast. So essentially you would record that separately and then upload it into the pre and post roll spaces you see here. Once you've got something in here, the next time you upload an episode, you would have the option to turn on pre and post roll, like I showed you before. So you would just turn that on, and it will stitch whatever is uploaded into these sections onto the beginning and or end of the episode. So a really quick and easy way of doing it that just saves you a bit of editing work. The only thing to note with this is it is a what I call a hard edit. So if you later on change the messaging in these sections, or if you remove the messaging from these sections later on, it will not remove or adjust it on the episodes that you've applied this messaging to. So it's basically baking it into the content if you like. So that's just something to bear in mind if you're going to be using this section. Share and publish is where all of the distribution bits lie. So this is included with every plan that we offer. So you have the option to manage the whole distribution process yourself if you want to. You would just click, I prefer to manage this myself. That collapses away, and then you've got your RSS feed link right here. And you have a bunch of boxes to put all the different links into your podcast on those different platforms once you get them back. And you also have a little link through to our help guides on how to submit to each of those different platforms as well. So you're not left in the dark by yourself. However, most people do opt to have us distribute the podcast for them. So in that case, you would click distribute my podcast here. And then that sends a request off to our submissions team, and they will get on it as soon as they possibly can. So you'll see it says submissions pending up here. Once they actually start working on it, you'll get an email update, and that will also change to say we're working on it. All these icons start grayed out like this one here. And once we get you approved on the different platforms, they highlight in color like this one. And you also get the option to copy the link to your podcast on that platform. Or open up your podcast on that platform and take a look at it, make sure it's all okay. So you'll get an email update once they pick up your request. You'll get another one in the middle once they've submitted to all the different platforms. So they're just waiting to hear back from them. And you get a final email update once everything is done. And that one will have all the links on it as well. But you can come into this section at any point and grab those links whenever you need them. So they're not lost forever in your email inbox. One thing to note about this, if you are planning on joining us in the next couple of days, we are having a bit of a backlog with submissions at the moment due to a new update that happened on Apple. It is a little bit buggy, unfortunately. So at the moment, we're not doing submissions to Apple because of that. You can keep up to date with the progress of that issue on status.podcast.co. We're tracking it there, or you can fire us a message and just ask us, how things are going on with that. Hopefully we'll have that back up and running very soon, though. Podcast player here is all the settings for the embeddable player, and also the settings for the episode players I showed you before. So you've got the embed code up the top here, and this is what the large player looks like with all the episodes on it. So you can change the color scheme. Like I mentioned before, you're not stuck with that black and purple. And the accent color can be pretty much anything you like. So if you've got branded colors, you can just type it in down there, and that will adjust for you. You can turn sharing and subscriptions on or off for the players, depending on what you want people to be able to do. Most people leave those on. And finally, you can choose between a squared off or a rounded off look for the mini player, depending on what aesthetic you're going for. And the embeddable subscribe button here is kind of like an extra thing. So if you wanted to have a handy little subscribe button embedded onto your website that people can go subscribe to your podcast really easily from, you can choose between a dark and a light theme for this and change the color of the word subscribe to anything you like. And then you can select up to 5 directories your podcast is live in. And on hover, it will show those options so people can click through and subscribe to whichever one is the best one for them. So it just makes things a little bit neater and more contained than having loads of links or badges all over your website. And then finally, right here, we have all the settings for your podcast page that we provide you with. Now, there's quite a bit to this, so do bear with me. And just as a reminder, as I said before, if you do have any questions about anything at all as I'm going through, remember to leave them in the comments, and I'll be getting to those as soon as I've finished doing this. So all of the page settings are right here, so it's worth just taking a few minutes to fiddle around with things and get the page looking exactly how you want it. So if you're on the business plan and the business plan only, you can actually just turn off the podcast page completely if you don't want to use it. Some people don't. Otherwise, it is on by default. The link here defaults to pod.co / your podcast name. But if you're on the Pro plan and above, you'll see there's a custom domain field down here. So you can apply whatever domain you want to that. We have a whole guide on how to set all of that up. You can have a little contact button on your page if you want to. So you just turn it on using the toggle and then apply an email address you're happy for people to contact you at. And then people will be able to email you about your podcast. If you're on the Pro plan and above, you also get access to putting a Google Analytics tracking on there. So you can track how many people have been on the page and all the different elements of the traffic on the page. You could connect up some social media channels down here. And also a donation link. So at the moment, we allow Patreon and PayPal. We're looking into adding a few more options to that later in the year. Design on the left here is pretty much just all the color schemes, font options, that type of stuff. So you can really play around with these and make the page your own. It's really worth having a little fiddle around and getting it looking exactly how you want it to. And you also have the options for the header of the page in here too. So it does default to our color and wave design like you can see here, but we do also allow you to have a custom background image in the back there instead. So we have the size guidelines for that in the Help Center, but off the top of my head, it's 1920 by 800, if anyone's taking notes. So yeah, you can have a custom background image in the back there. If you do have a custom background image, you might not necessarily want this overlay with the artwork and the title and things on it. So you can, that one. You can turn that off so you just have a clean image in the background there. Entirely up to you. About on the left here is basically the description of your podcast. So if you're on the starter plan, it will automatically pull in the description of your podcast that we applied in settings. If you're on the Pro plan and above, though, you can customize this however you want. You can make it longer. You can do what we've done here and embed a video into it, or you can have images in there as well. So it's really up to you how you want to format that and customize it. And then the final thing here is for Pro plan and above. And this is basically adding in a little host section so people can find out more about you as a podcast host. So you can add in an image, what kind of role you've got, a bit of a description about you, where people can find you on your own social media. And you can add in multiple of these as well. So if you've got multiple hosts, you can add those people in as well. So just to give you a quick idea of what one of these looks like once it's set up, that was completely the wrong button, excuse me. So I'll just show you this one as it stands at the moment. So you can see that header image at the top here, the color and wave design. The subscribe button pops out and gives you all the different places you can subscribe to the podcast. And the share button also gives you a few places you can share the podcast with your friends. You've got all the social media links up the top here in a row. Below that, you have the episodes of the podcast, so you can access these. If you're in seasons, you've got tabs at the top here to switch between seasons really easily. If you do play an episode as well, it does come up with a little bar down the bottom here with all your usual controls, including a speed control, those crazy people that listen at 2.5. If you click the little eye as well, you can get through to a separate page that is just for that one individual episode by itself. Below that, though, you have the About section with that lovely video that we embedded in there. So that all sits below there. And then just below that, again, you've got the host section I showed you, so you can find out more about the host of the podcast. And below that, I have my Patreon link, so people can donate to the podcast if they feel so generous. And you can see the little contact link down the bottom there as well that I set up, so people can contact me, or potential sponsors could contact you via that link as well. So really easy, really simple, but just something nice, simple and clean that you can share out if you want to start sharing your podcast and gaining some followers through social media. The last thing to point out before I start answering some questions is just if you are somebody that's looking at doing multiple podcasts, we do have network accounts available. So those are our pro and business accounts. So they allow you to have multiple podcasts on the one account so you can manage everything in one login rather than having loads of different logins. So that just looks something like this once you've got a few different podcasts set up on there. So you can click through to a podcast and manage it really easily, and then you can flip between different ones that you're working on really easily using the list. You can also host other people's podcasts on your account as well. So to do that, you would need to add them in. So here you would be able to click Invite User, apply their email address, and then select what kind of role they're going to have in the account. So admin has access to everything on the account minus the billing. Only the account owner has access to that, which would be you. And then limit to specific podcasts is just if you want them to manage just 1 or 2 podcasts and not touch anything else, you can apply what podcasts they have access to, and they'll only be able to access those. Content creator, I believe, only has access to the episodes tab, so they'd only be able to manage the episodes and nothing else. And podcast manager has access to everything to do with that podcast or those podcasts that you give them access to. So it's really easy to make sure everybody can't fiddle with everybody else's content in here. And that is pretty much it for my quick little run through. So now I believe we're going to get into answering some questions. So let me just have a quick look. Oh, I've just seen that Brian said hello as soon as this started. I remember you. I've been talking to you. Hello. Lovely to see that you're in the stream with us. Brilliant. So yeah, we had a few questions sent in that people wanted us to answer on the live stream. So we'll get stuck into that. So the first one is the age-old question that comes up every live stream. How do I get music licensing for my podcast? The short answer is you don't. Podcast licensing, music licensing, for podcasting is unfortunately something that isn't very well developed at the moment. There's not really any licensing that covers you for using copyrighted music in podcasting due to their on-demand nature and the fact that they're downloadable. It's not a good combo for licensing, unfortunately. So at the moment, our advice is generally don't use copyrighted music. There's plenty of royalty-free music out there that you can use for intros and outros and segues between sections of the podcast, that type of thing. So it's well worth checking out. We actually do have our own royalty-free album of PodSafe music you can use. So that's at Podcastco/music. Really easy URL to remember. So yeah, if you want to check that out, we have, I think it's like an album and a half there now of royalty-free music you can grab and use for your podcast. You don't need to pay anything or have any type of licensing to use that. The second question I've got here is, how long should my episodes be? That is kind of like a how long is a piece of string question. So it depends. Generally, we do advise sticking to around about 30 to 40 minutes max if you can. However, there are going to be some topics that will require longer episodes. So quite often you see things like true crime podcasts that run for about an hour an episode. That is purely just because there's so much detail to include there. It wouldn't make sense to limit it down to a shorter episode. So, you know, if your audience is sticking around for the entire hour, they're listening to the whole thing, I would say you can afford to go longer and stay longer. But generally, the kind of more easily digestible you can make an episode, the better. We've got one that says, what are some good podcast ideas? I love this question. I get asked this one quite a lot on the support desk. So what are some good podcast ideas? We do have quite a few articles on the Podcast.co blog. So it's Podcastco/content. Loads and loads and loads of stuff on there that's so useful. That you can use to plan out your own podcast and really come up with some pretty decent ideas. I believe we had one quite long article that we turned into a YouTube video, so you might be able to find it on this YouTube channel. That was a bunch of different ideas you could take and use for your own podcast. So it's worth checking those out. But as a kind of short answer to this question, there's not really much point in me telling you what I think is a good podcast idea, because I could sit here and say, I think a Star Wars podcast would be a brilliant idea. But if you're not into Star Wars, there's no point in you talking about it. So really, as long as you choose something that you're passionate about and that you're really into and you really enjoy talking about and you could talk about for quite a long time, that's what matters. People will be able to sense whether you're passionate about something or not. So choose something you're passionate about and stick with it, and you'll find a dedicated audience in no time. So someone said, what are the different plans that are available? That is a brilliant question. So I think I still have my screen on show for you guys. So if I just pull up pricing page, you'll be able to have a look. So this is at podcast.co/pricing. That's where you can check out the different plans we have on offer. So I'll just leave it in US dollars for now, but we do have the pricing available in pounds and euros as well. So don't worry too much about it. So we have 3 different plans. The starter plan is recommended for if you're just starting one podcast and you're kind of brand new to it and you're just getting things set up. So that is our $29 per month plan. Or alternatively, you can pay annually, and that gives you, it knocks 2 months off the pricing. So you pay $290 per year. And each of these plans, Daryl popping up there, you can't stay away. And each of these plans comes with a 14-day free trial as well. So you do get a good period of time to test things out, make sure that we're the right choice for you. So with the starter plan, you get everything I showed you, unless I said it was for pro and business only. You get enough room to do one podcast, and that is with unlimited episodes. So we don't put a limit on the amount of content you can upload. And you get 10,000 monthly downloads per month. So what that means is you will be given an allowance, if you like, for 10,000 downloads per month. And that resets every single month. And to be frank, if you're reaching 10,000 downloads per month, you actually qualify for our sponsorship scheme. So you'd be doing exceedingly well. One user just means you get one login for the account, which is your own. You get 2 hours worth of transcription a month. So again, that resets every month. And you get the podcast page that I showed you as well. The next plan up is the Pro plan. That is $49 a month or $490 per year. So with that, you get everything that's in the starter plan here, but you get enough room to have up to 20 podcasts on the account, each with unlimited episodes again. You get a monthly allowance of 50,000 downloads this time. That is across all podcasts. And also 20 logins for the account as well. So effectively, you could have one login per podcast if you're managing multiple people's podcasts. You get the ability to add in those pre and post roll ads that I showed you before, 5 hours worth of transcription per month. And with the podcast page, you get all the additional stuff. So the Google Analytics integration, the host section, and the ability to have a custom domain. And the final plan here, our highest one, is business. So this is $99 per month or $990 per year. So you get everything in the last 2 plans that I showed you, but on this one, you get infinite shows. You can make as many as you want. Each of those gets unlimited episodes as per the other plans. You get a monthly allowance of 100,000 downloads with this plan, again, across all podcasts on the network. You have enough room for up to 50 people added to the account. Pre and post roll ads. You get the ability to have private podcasts, which I actually haven't spoken about, so I'll mention those in a minute for you. But effectively, those are podcasts that you add subscribers to. So they're pretty good for if you want an internal podcast for your company that's just shared amongst your staff, for example. That's really good for that. You get 10 hours worth of transcription per month, so that resets every month as before. You get all the advanced stuff with the podcast pages, and you get the additional ability to turn it off completely if you don't want to use it. So those are the 3 plans we have on offer. If you do feel like you would need something that's a bit bigger than the business plan, it's basically just fire us a message telling us what sort of stuff you're going for, and like what limitations you would need, what allowances you would need, and then we'll be able to work out a custom plan for you in that regard. So really, really simple and straightforward there. So if I just go back to my example account, now is a great time to show you the private podcasts that I missed earlier. So thankfully, I have an example. It's like a blue pizza moment. Here's one I made earlier. So this is an example of a private podcast. Now, as you can see, I don't have the share and publish tab over here anymore. I have subscribers instead. So that's pretty much the main difference here is you add subscribers to this podcast instead of having it publicly available where anybody can subscribe. So you can see here in manage subscribers on the left, I can see that myself and my colleague Aaron are both subscribed to this podcast in particular. Each of us has our own unique feed. So each subscriber gets their own feed that's unique to them, just to try and make it a bit more secure there. And I can remove people at any point as well. Add subscribers here is how you would add subscribers to the podcast. Who'd have thought it? So you can add in people's email addresses here separated by a comma, or you can whitelist entire domains. So if anybody applies to get access to the podcast that's on one of these email domains, they should get access straight away. And also you get the podcast page, but it's slightly different. So let me show you what I mean here. So when someone accesses the page, but they haven't got access yet, it will look something like this. So they would just type in their email address and click request access. And then if they're on the email list that I just showed you, or they have an email that's in the whitelist domains section, they will be sent an email just to verify that they're okay with that. And basically, it will give them access to another version of that landing page where they'll be able to add the podcast to whatever is the easiest app for them. So for instance, if they're accessing on an iPhone, they'll have the option to press a button and add the podcast to their Apple Podcast library, just to make it easier for them to listen to. So it's in a place they're familiar with rather than having to come back to the landing page every single time. So you do have a few settings for this as well. You can apply an email address here if you want to apply an email address. Well, actually, I think you have to apply an email address here, but this is basically where people can reach you if they're having issues with accessing the podcast, or if they need to contact you to actually have their email put on the subscribers list, they can email you there. You can choose between a dark and a light theme, and also whether or not you use the podcast artwork as the background image on the header. So there's less customization options there, but really people will only be accessing this page for a couple of minutes until they've added it to their own library, and then they shouldn't need to access it anymore. Now that that's explained, could I start an internal podcast? I've kind of answered that one just now. Yes, so if you wanted to start an internal podcast for just your staff in your company, you would be using a private podcast like the one that I've just showed off here, and that will only be accessible to the people that you allow. What's a good amount of people to appear on a podcast? That's a good question. So essentially, it is kind of up to you, but if I can give an opinion, and this is an opinion, so do take it with a pinch of salt, panel shows that have quite a lot of people on them are hard to listen to. If you have a visual podcast running on YouTube and you also turn that into an audio podcast, and it has quite a lot of people appearing on a panel sort of format, it is worth just considering how that's going to come across in audio. Because obviously with the visual, you can see everybody, you can see who's talking, and it makes sense in our heads. If that is then converted into an audio format, you take the visual away. So if people are talking over the top of each other, people aren't necessarily going to know who's talking at what time. And also people talking over each other as well in that format can get a little chaotic for people to listen to. So they might switch off a little bit earlier. So I would probably say 2 people, 3 at an absolute max. But if you're going to do a big panel show like that, it is worth just having a think about how you're going to manage that so that people know who's talking and that nobody talks across each other, which can be difficult to manage. So it's just worth having a think about. And I'm pretty sure that is the last question that I have on my little sheet here. So that is where we will finish things. Thank you very much for joining me tonight. We do these live stream demos every single month on the last Thursday of each month. So we'll be back again in May. So don't worry if you're just tuning in now. You will be able to catch this once it's processed and things. It'll be available on the YouTube channel for you to watch back. Or if you'd rather get involved with a live one, the next one will be at the end of May. So thank you very much, everyone. And if you need anything else, you can get in contact with us at help@podcast.co. And that email address will just get through to me and I'll be able to answer any more questions you might have about getting started. Thank you very much, guys. Bye.
Hey, before you go anywhere, I have a quick question for you. Do you have a podcast? And if you do you want to book more interesting, high-profile guests on your show? Well, if you answered yes to either of these questions, I'd love to invite you to come and join our community over at matchmaker.fm. Matchmaker is a service that connects awesome podcasts just like yours with incredible and high-profile guests that make for really interesting conversations. It's really straightforward to get started and completely free to sign up. Just connect using your LinkedIn, Facebook or Google account, and then you can begin connecting with guests based on their area of expertise, location, and much more. If you haven't checked it out already, go to matchmaker.fm, get started. It's just like Tinder, but for podcasters.